Feeling stuck? Yearning for more? You're in the right place. This is Midlife Moxie with Nicole, where you're going to get a weekly dose of courage, clarity, and maybe a little bit of chaos as we navigate our best chapter yet, midlife. Welcome back to Midlife Moxie with Nicole. Today we have episode 14, and we are going to be talking about resilience. The last episode we touched on courage. These two very much go hand in hand and tie in together. I want every midlife woman to understand what resilience is and how it presents and shows up in life. Because it can be very specific, it can be complex, but it can be beautifully transformative. And especially when situations emerge in life that throw you for a loop. And out of this, you discover that you're not only stronger than you've ever imagined, but resilience allows you to feel yourself being more authentic and more powerful and maybe even more alive. So last week we built the courage muscle. Today we're going to explore what happens when courage gets tested by storms that midlife eventually brings to all of us inevitably. The goal here isn't to bounce back to who you were before the storm. The goal is to discover who you're becoming through the breaking. And here's what I've personally learned through my own perfect storm. Sometimes the breaking open is exactly what your soul's been waiting for. This is a sacred truth that I need you to hear, because midlife resilience is about returning to who you were before. It's about discovering who you're becoming through the breaking. Let's redefine resilience for midlife women. And we'll start by actually understanding what resilience looks like at this stage of life. Because we've probably heard and been told a lot of things about resilience. And I feel that a lot of it's really incomplete. I see the definition of resilience for women in midlife as the capacity to navigate and adapt to the convergence of multiple significant transitions, all while maintaining psychological well-being and a sense of personal agency without sacrificing your authentic self on the altar of everyone else's comfort. The last part, well, that's where we stop being good girls who push through and start being dangerous women who transform through. What makes midlife resilience distinctive is the sheer volume of the interconnectedness of changes that are happening simultaneously. Women in this stage often face what researchers have called the sandwich generation. Pressures while caring for aging parents, while supporting children or launching them into independence. We also deal with hormonal changes from perimenopause and menopause. We have potential career shifts or workplace ageism, relationship renegotiations, and evolving identity questions. And add all of these up, and you have the perfect storm of multiple stressors coming at you. These storms are happening to you, but more importantly, they're happening for you. They are stripping away everything that was never really yours to begin with. Maybe it was the roles that you never chose, or the expectations that you never agreed to, the version of you created to keep everyone else comfortable. The resilience required here differs from earlier stages in life in several key ways. In young adulthood, resilience often focuses on building identity and establishing independence. There are challenges, and while they can be significant, they are typically more sequential and forward looking. Midlife resilience, by contrast, involves simultaneously managing loss and growth, often requiring women to grieve who they were while discovering who they're becoming. Grief isn't just pathology, it's wisdom. It's your soul mourning for what was never meant to last so you can make room for what's meant to emerge. And there's also a temporal complex that is unique to midlife. Women at this stage are acutely aware of time, both the years behind them and the reality of the finite years ahead. This awareness can create urgency around unmet dreams while also bringing wisdom about what truly matters. Resilience here involves learning to hold both the grief of roads not taken and the fierce excitement of the possibilities that are still available. Hormonal changes of menopause and perimenopause add another layer, affecting everything from sleep and mood regulation to cognitive processing, aka brain fog. But instead of seeing these changes as deficits, what if we saw them as ways of your body preparing you for the next phase of your power? Resilience during this period involves developing new strategies for emotional regulation and self care that honor these physiological shifts as sacred transitions, not medical problems. Perhaps most importantly, midlife resilience for women often involves reclaiming personal authority after decades of prioritizing others' needs. It's about learning to trust your own judgment, set boundaries that might feel dangerous to others, and to pursue your own goals. And sometimes that's the first time you've done that in decades. It's about becoming the kind of woman who make some people nervous because she stopped asking for permission. Let me share something deeply personal with you because I want you to understand that when I talk about midlife storms, I'm not speaking from theory or anything that I read in a book. I am actually speaking from the sacred ground of lived experience, from a place where wisdom is born through fire. When you go through a death of a parent, or in my case, both parents, in a short period of time, life doesn't just change, it gets detonated. I was navigating emotions that were harder than anything I had experienced before. Grief felt like sometimes it might just swallow me whole. And in the midst of all of this, I was also going through a profound transition of learning about myself deeply through this passage of life, discovering parts of myself that I had buried under decades of being everyone's everything. I was navigating complex systems like medical care and doctors, lawyers, and legal systems. And while I formerly was a nurse, so the medical side wasn't new to me, I was moving through them in a much different capacity. This wasn't textbook. This wasn't anything that I learned in school. As the executor of my parents' estate, I was very busy making phone calls and answering emails. And I had moments where I felt like I was drowning and just trying to keep my head above water. Of course, during this time, I also walked away from a career that had defined me for over 25 years. And I was having what I now recognize as a sacred ego death, feeling all of the emotions of that loss while starting a business on shaky ground and really having nothing but hope and a dream that it would all work out. But here's what I understand now that I couldn't see then. I wasn't just losing my career. I was exiting a system that had never been designed for someone like me. Someone who refused to play politics. Someone who wouldn't betray her values for advancement. Someone who had been conditioned to believing that being the good employee, the reliable one, or maybe even the team player would somehow eventually be rewarded. And as I got passed over for promotions, I now see that it wasn't rejection. It was liberation disguised as devastation for me at the time. And honestly, I would not recommend building a business while grieving because I can now look back and see things so differently. But at the time, I had no choice. I needed to do what needed to get done. And yes, my friends, this was me pushing through because it was all I really knew how to do back then. I was still operating from the good girl conditioning that says, don't complain, just handle it and be grateful that you can handle it. As I spent time doing emails, making phone calls, and becoming increasingly frustrating as the days passed by, throwing in the towel was not an option, though I had many days I wish it were. What I didn't realize then was that my rage at those systems, the legal system, the medical system, the business systems that seem to be designed to exhaust you into compliance, it was all rage and sacred information. I can look back upon that time in my life as resilience defined, a new resilience level unlocked in many ways for me, but not the kind of resilience that bounces you back to who you were before, the kind that transforms you into who you were always meant to be. What I learned through that experience is that sometimes resilience doesn't feel like strength in the moment. Sometimes it feels like putting one foot in front of the other because you have no other choice. Sometimes it feels like drowning while you still manage to keep your head above water. And sometimes it does feel like rage. And that rage is not something that needs to be fixed or spiritually bypassed. It's sacred information about what needs to change. So let's talk about some storms that might hit you or have hit you in midlife, because what you're facing and understanding helps you prepare and respond more effectively. And maybe even more importantly, it helps you recognize that these storms aren't just random punishments put in your way to knock you off track. They're invitations to exit what was never meant to last. Career disruptions are huge, whether it's layoffs or industry changes, workplace ageism, or the realization that the career that you built might no longer fit who you're becoming. Many women find themselves questioning decades of professional identity. But here's what I want you to know. That questioning isn't a crisis. It's an awakening. It's your authentic inner self saying, this role was just never really mine to begin with. There are relationship earthquakes that shake many women in midlife. Maybe marriages that worked for the child rearing years no longer fit when the kids leave. Or friendships may shift as people grow in different directions. Dating after divorce or widowhood brings on its own set of challenges. But what if these relationship shifts aren't failures? What if they're your life making room for connections that can handle the real you? Health wake up calls become more common, whether it's your own health issues or watching your parents decline, or simply the reality that your body isn't what it used to be. The invincibility of youth gives way to a more complex relationship with morality and physical limitations. But your body, it changing isn't betrayal, it's transformation. It's your physical form preparing you for the next phase of your power. Financial pressures also intensify during this age. College tuitions, aging parent care, maybe your own retirement planning, or potentially supporting adult children who are struggling to launch in an increasingly expensive and sometimes cruel world. These pressures can feel overwhelming, but they're also opportunities to examine what you've been taught about security, about what you should prioritize, or maybe even about whose needs come first. Identity crises are almost universal. Who you are when you're not primarily defined by your role as a mother, wife, or a career title? What do you do when you've spent decades focusing on what everyone else needs? This doesn't have to be a crisis. It can be one of the most sacred questions that you'll ever ask yourself. And the answer? It's going to be dangerous to anyone who benefited from your compliance. The transition to an empty nest can be devastating for women whose primary identity was wrapped up in active mothering. Suddenly, now you have time and space for yourself, and this can feel disorienting rather than liberating. But what if these aren't losses? What if this is the universe giving back to yourself? And of course, we have other unexpected storms, sudden deaths, accidents, illnesses, economic downturns, global pandemics. Life has a way of throwing curveballs just when you think you have things figured out. Each of these storms teach us that control was always an illusion. And sometimes the most resilient thing you can do is stop trying to manage the unmanageable and start trusting your ability to transform through whatever comes. So, how do you build resilience for these storms? How do you develop the capacity not just to survive them, but be transformed by them in ways that serve your authentic power rather than conditioned compliance? First, let's talk about reframing the narrative. This isn't just positive thinking or minimizing the real struggles you might be going through. Rather, this is a learning to see yourself as the protagonist of your story rather than the victim of circumstances. My own shift was from seeing that the difficult period I went through, where it felt like I was just surviving, was recognizing it as resilience defined, is a perfect example. Women who bounce back strongest often learn to view their challenges as evidence of their strength rather than proof of their limitations. Your storms aren't happening just because you're unlucky. They're happening because you're ready to transform and call the truth forth. Having a both and mindset can help navigate the contradictions of midlife. You can grieve your losses and feel excited about new possibilities. You can feel overwhelmed by responsibilities and be proud of your capability. You can be angry about the systems that fail you and be grateful for the strength that carried you through. This cognitive flexibility prevents the all or nothing thinking that can trap us into despair or denial. Cultivating selective vulnerability means choosing who gets access to your struggles while you're in them. Many women discover that they need to shrink their circle during crisis periods, and choosing to share deeply with only those who can truly support them, rather than trying to maintain all relationships at full intensity. This isn't about being closed off, it's just being strategic with your sacred energy. Developing flexible boundaries becomes crucial. This might mean saying no to commitments that once seem important, or asking for help in ways that feel uncomfortable, or setting limits with family members who are used to your unlimited availability. Please see my prior episode about boundaries to learn more. The key here is learning that boundaries can be situational and temporary rather than permanent walls placed. And the dangerous truth here is boundaries aren't mean, they're sacred. They're how you protect your transformation. Creating micro recoveries throughout difficult periods can help prevent complete depletion. This might mean 5 minutes of deep breathing between difficult phone calls, taking a short walk after a challenging conversation, or a brief ritual at the end of overwhelming days. These small practices can create islands of calm in chaotic periods. They're not selfish, they're strategic. They're how you maintain your capacity to show up for what truly matters. Embracing the idea of good enough standards allows you to maintain functioning without perfectionist paralysis. During my business building while grieving period, I had to let some things be less than ideal to focus on what truly was essential. Perfect was the enemy of progress, and progress was the enemy of paralysis. Sometimes good enough is revolutionary when you've been conditioned to believe that anything less than perfect makes you a failure. Building future self connections can help maintain hope in dark periods. This involves regularly checking in with yourself, asking questions like, what would my future self want me to do right now? Or how will my future self view this current struggle? This isn't bypassing present pain, it's remembering that this storm is temporary, but the woman that you're becoming through it is permanent. There's a fascinating and complex relationship between courage and resilience, and it's not always the linear progression that you might expect. In many ways, they're more like dance partners. Sometimes courage leads, and sometimes resilience does. And sometimes they move together in ways that are hard to separate. Courage often appears as the gateway, especially in midlife transitions. It takes courage to acknowledge that something fundamental needs to change. Maybe to admit that your marriage isn't working, or to leave a career that no longer fits. Or like me, you start a business while grieving. Maybe it's stop being everyone's everything. This initial courage is born from what I consider to be a sacred desperation. It's a deep knowing that staying the same is no longer sustainable and that compliance is killing your soul. But here's where it gets interesting. Resilience often births new courage. As you weather the storms and you discover that you can survive what you thought might destroy you, each of those experiences of bouncing back, or better yet, transforming through, builds evidence that you can handle more than you had previously believed. This creates what some researchers have called mastery experiences, but I tend to think of them as dangerous woman moments. Proof to yourself that you have capabilities that you didn't even know existed. Micro courage can build resilience muscles. Every small act of courage, from making the difficult phone call, having hard conversations, setting boundaries that make other people uncomfortable, or choosing yourself over other people's expectations, strengthens your resilience infrastructure. It's like physical training. Each rep builds capacity for the next challenge. Courage requires different flavors at different times. Sometimes it's the courage to act. Sometimes it's the courage to wait. Sometimes it's the courage to ask for help. And sometimes it's the courage to stand alone. Sometimes it's the courage to hope when everything looks bleak. Sometimes the courage to grieve when everyone just expects you to move on. Resilience provides you the safety net for courage. As you develop more resilience, more confidence in your ability to recover from setbacks, to transform through challenges, you become willing to take bigger, courageous risks. You know that even if something doesn't work out, you have the capacity to bounce back and try again. And more than that, you know that you have the capacity to be transformed by whatever life throws at you. Here's what I think of as the retroactive courage recognition, because many women don't realize how courageous they were being until they look back. In the moment, it might have felt like you just did what needed to be done. What felt like mere survival was actually profound courage in action. Looking back at my perfect storm period, I can see now that every phone call I made, every boundary I set, every day that I chose to keep building my business while my world felt like it was falling apart, that was courage. That was me becoming dangerous to systems that required my compliance. Midlife courage has a different quality than earlier life courage. Often it's about proving yourself and more about honoring yourself. It's courage informed by experience, tempered by wisdom, and motivated by the awareness that time is precious and your authentic self is sacred. It's the courage of a woman who has finally stopped asking for permission. What I need you to understand and take away, maybe from the most important part of our conversation today, is that midlife resilience isn't about returning to who you were before. It's about discovering who you're becoming through the breaking. This is the sacred truth that challenges everything. This is fundamentally different from resilience at other life stages where bouncing back often means restoring previous functioning or getting back on a familiar track. Midlife resilience requires embracing, or what I think to be of a Transformational recovery, allowing the storms to change you rather than just enduring them. It's about letting the breaking open become the breaking through. And my story perfectly illustrates this, in my opinion. I didn't bounce back to being the same person with the same career after losing my parents and walking away from my career. Instead, I allowed that profound disruption in my life to reveal new capacities, new priorities, and ultimately a new vision of myself that I was bringing to life. One who was dangerous to systems that required compliance, sacred to the women who needed permission, and a revolutionary to a culture that benefits from women's silence. The new resistance level unlocked wasn't just about me being stronger, it was about me being different. It was about becoming the kind of woman who honors her rage as sacred information, who builds a business that serves a revolution rather than just revenue, a business that gives other women to permission to exit the things that don't serve them. This shift in perspective is liberating because it removes the pressure to get back to normal when normal no longer exists or serves you. It honors the reality that some changes in midlife are irreversible. Parents don't come back, bodies age, children grow up, careers end, illusions shatter. Fighting to return to a previous state just wastes precious energy that could be directed toward growth and your own personal, authentic transformation. The practical implication is profound. Instead of asking, how do I get back to where I was? The key question becomes, what is this experience trying to teach me about who I'm meant to be now? This reframe transforms crisis from pure destruction into a catalyst for pure and authentic self-discovery. It makes the storm sacred rather than just survival. Midlife offers us a unique opportunity for this kind of resilience because you finally have life experience that you can trust your own judgment, skills to navigate complex challenges, and enough awareness of time's passage to prioritize what truly matters. The storms you face may be intense, but your capacity to weather them while growing through them is at its peak. You're finally dangerous enough to transform rather than just endure. So here's a challenge that I have for you this week. And I want you to approach this with gentleness, but fierce honesty. Think about a current challenge or storm in your life currently. And instead of asking yourself, how do you get back to normal? Shift the perspective and ask yourself, what is this experience trying to teach me about who I'm meant to be now? Write this in a journal on a piece of paper and explore it. Ask yourself, what old version of yourself is this challenge asking you to release? What new capacities or strengths is it revealing in you? How might you be different on the other side of this? And how could that be a gift rather than a loss? What would transformational recovery look like for you? And if you feel rage about your situation, allow that to be sacred information. What is it trying to tell you? This isn't about forcing positivity onto genuine pain. It's about opening to the possibility that your storms just might be sculpting you into someone who is more authentic and powerful than you were before. It's about honoring both grief and growth, rage and wisdom, breaking and becoming. So if you're in the middle of a storm right now, practice one micro recovery technique this week. Maybe it's 3 deep breaths between difficult tasks, a 5-minute walk after a difficult conversation, or a ritual at the end of days that feel overwhelming. These aren't luxuries, they're revolutionary acts of self-preservation. So as I wrap up today, I want to leave you with a sacred truth, because you're not broken by your storms. You're just being sculpted by them. Every challenge that you've weathered, every loss that you've grieved, every time that you've had to rebuild, these are not evidence of a life gone wrong. They're evidence of a life fully lived, evidence of a woman who has the courage to keep growing even when growth is painful. The resilience that you're building at this stage of life isn't just about surviving the next storm. It's about becoming the kind of woman who can weather anything while staying true to herself. It's not about discovering you're not just stronger than who you thought. You're more authentic, powerful, and dangerous to systems that might require your compliance more than you ever thought possible. These storms aren't punishments, they're just invitations to exit what was never meant to last and to step in where you were always meant to be. Your rage is sacred information about what needs to change. Selfishness isn't a sin. It's a revolution disguised as self-care. So until next episode, remember that your voice matters, your dreams are valid, and you have everything that you need, not just to survive your storms, but to be transformed by them into the dangerous, sacred, revolutionary woman that you were always meant to be. I remind you to choose yourself, trust your resilience, and never underestimate the power of a woman who knows that breaking open can be the beginning of becoming whole. Before you go, I want to make sure that you know how to stay connected to this work, because what we have talked about today, this is just the beginning. If you're sitting there thinking, holy shit, she just described my entire life, and you want to know exactly what patterns are running the show in your life, I've created something specifically for you. You can head on over to my website, www.nicolehaight.com, and take the assessment, which sacred pattern is running your midlife. It's a free diagnostic tool that will tell you exactly where you are in your own conditioning and what your next steps should be. There's no fluff, no generic advice, just precise information about your specific patterns. Because here's the thing, you can't interrupt what you can't see. And most women are trying to change their lives without understanding the deeper nervous system conditioning that is actually driving their choices. If you want to dive deeper into these conversations and connect with other women who are also done performing their way through life, you can join my private Facebook group. Link will be in the show notes. And it's where we have conversations, real, raw, unfiltered truth about women in midlife. And if you want to be on my VIP list for weekly doses of truth that maybe help keep you accountable to your own transformation, there is a link in the show notes, but there's also a link at my website, www.nicolehaight.com, where you can sign up to be on my email list. This isn't a typical newsletter filled with tips and inspiration, though I do include that from time to time. This is a newsletter where I share hard truths, insights, raw, unfiltered things that are just not socially acceptable on social media. And these awarenesses that you can take away from what I share can be a catalyst for change. So I invite you to sign up. And if you're ready to go even deeper, because you might be tired of all of this surface level work and you really want a whole system level transformation, everything you need to know about working with me is on my website, www.nicolehaight.com. I'm not a coach, and this isn't coaching, and it's not therapy. And it's sure as hell not spiritual bypassing. This is a resurrection of the nervous system. And this is for the woman who is ready to stop performing and start living. You can also follow me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at I am Nicole Haight, where I share reminders about conditioning and women and midlife, confronting truths and desires that are just frankly not up for negotiation. So next week we will continue to have discussions that likely will make some of you squirm. It is what I'm best at. But if this episode shifted something for you, do me a favor and leave a review. Not because I need an ego boost, but because there are women out there who are Googling, why do I feel invisible in my own life at 2 a.m.? And your review might be what helps them find this podcast. Your review could also be the breadcrumb that leads another woman out of performance prison and into her own resurrection. So until next week, remember, you don't need permission to want what you want. You never did. That was just conditioning dressed up as consideration. You're a woman in midlife. You don't need permission. You just need to have desires and wants and the ability to be able to go after all of them. So stop asking and start claiming.